Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Let's just introduce all of you to Startup Grind. Startup Grind is this, it started back in the US, and basically we come together every couple of weeks or months and basically bring together entrepreneurs, mentors, investors and the like, and let a group of this entrepreneurial scene, just get to know each other, ask questions, get mentorship. Any burning questions about entrepreneurship can be asked. It may not necessarily be about entrepreneurship, but just getting to know, what are the resources around in the industry, in entrepreneurship, and even in educational institutions as well. So, Darius, good evening. Hello.
Good evening.
I'm gonna plunge right into this little interview. Darius, tell us, how was it like for you growing up? Were you brought up in a very entrepreneurial family? Did your parents do business as well? How did you grow up?
Okay, thanks for the question. Can you guys hear me from the back? We okay? Okay, so before we start advertisement, since you all have some free time and some parts of this will be boring, since I'll be boring in some parts of this, one of the new startup I'm working on now is called BuildPin. So if you have an iPhone, maybe you can download the app and let us know what you think. It's still very, very early stages. I've been told just 5 minutes ago it crashes, so bear with it, but let us know what you think. If you don't have an iPhone, you can also sign up at buildpin.com. The website is coming, Android is coming. We'll talk about this a little bit later, and then the Wi-Fi access point is over here. Okay, back to your question.
Thank you, Darius.
Shameless plug. How was it like? Oh yeah, you gotta make use of every opportunity, right?
I know, right?
You have to be opportunist, right? So, how was it like growing up? I think the most distinctive thing I would say is, I actually came to Singapore. I wasn't born here.
Mm-hmm.
I came to Singapore when I was 13, and I started living alone since then.
Okay.
I
Where
think
did
that
you come
maybe
from?
I was actually born in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But my family stayed in Hong Kong because of 1997 and other reasons.
Sure.
They kind of just dumped me overseas.
Mm-hmm.
It happened to be Singapore, so I was here since I was 13, and I lived alone since then. I think that would probably be what I would identify as one of the most formative things that, for me, formative experience, because I kind of got used to making all the decisions by myself, good and bad.
Did you stay with family members at all?
No.
Just
It was
alone?
in the hostel.
In a hostel?
Yeah.
Cool. So you started tenCube. How old were you?
We were just fresh out of school. I actually worked for 4 months since I graduated, so I'm guessing that would put me at 24, I think.
24. And you studied at NUS?
NUS. I graduated from NUS
Okay.
as an engineer.
As an engineer. And what was your first job like?
My first job was actually at a technology marketing firm. So what we did is that we did campaigns for guys like HP, Cisco, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
We took their fairly technical product brief and turned it into something that buyers such as people running universities and people running governments can understand what those things are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we did for them.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your school, when you were studying. Did you have any interest? And, throughout your teenagers, you had all the time to yourself. What did you do with your time?
Play game or no man, I mean that's what everybody does, right?
So you spent all your time on computer games?
Well, a good part of it, I mean, inherently I think most people they have different tendency. Most boys play this game, but you also have different tendency in terms of when we were of course interested in technology at some level. I think that influenced everybody, right? When we were growing up, when Hotmail first came out, IRC first came out, right? Everybody was chatting, right? Stuff like that. Of course, we spent time on those things as well, but no different than any other.
You didn't get out in the sun at all?
Some sun occasionally. Our good educational program in Singapore forces us to do that. So.
Okay, so you spent a lot of time on computer games. What did you learn from computer games, really?
I'm not sure I can say that it was very fruitful, but I don't think I can explain what actually a game of computer games is.
So you spent 4 months in a technology marketing firm. What drove you out of it and to start tenCube? Or did you start tenCube within 4 months of getting out of school?
Well, I think by the time I graduated, I already, I think maybe it was the 4 years in NUS that kind of put me in a state whereby I already know I wanted to start a business at some point.
Okay.
Just never knew when was the right time, right place for it. So we can talk about what happened in NUS that got me to that point. But I think if you talk about the first job, 4 months in the job, really quite simple. It was a logical decision. Wasn't a dash of inspiration or anything so fancy. It was just I looked at the job and I looked at all the other jobs I could get, and I kind of extrapolated that for 5 to 10 years. It's like, do I really want to do that? And don't get me wrong, I love the company, right? I still stay in touch with all my colleagues from there. But it was clearly not something that I can extrapolate and say that this is what I want to do for the next 5 years. And it was also quite clear that the opportunity cost is not much in the bigger scheme of things. So I felt like I had nothing to do, so try it out.
Okay. So how did you conceptualize the idea of starting tenCube?
So maybe to give a bit of background, right? tenCube created a product called Wave Secure. That was mainly what we did. What it does is that it helps track a lost phone. Help disable it so that people can't use it. If somebody steals your phone, they can't use it. You can also get a copy of data on the phone and wipe it off remotely. It's kind of like Find My iPhone if you use iPhone nowadays. But this was before iPhone existed even. So how we conceptualized this, actually I wasn't the originator of that. It was my co-founder, Varun. It was kind of the classical story. He kept losing his phone.
Okay.
Because he kept getting drunk.
Okay.
But he was also a hardcore engineer, so instead of getting pissed off and only being pissed off, he got pissed off and said that, okay, we've got to solve this problem. It makes no sense that this problem is still not solved. Because at that time, phones were getting smarter. It was, if you think about it, it's always on, always connected. It makes no sense that even when you lost a phone, that there's absolutely no way to get back the phone or the data. So we kind of just started off as a hobby project, and then it became a company where we took a more serious look on whether it can become a company.
And how did you, what steps did you take from the point that you had this idea, okay, this is what I want to do. What did you do in order to make it into a company? And also, did you do a lot of market research? What steps did you take in terms of the technology development?
Okay, I think there's 2 big questions embedded in there. One is, how did we go from a hobby project to deciding to start, right? I think in terms of research and market research, we did 2 things. We were very naive back then, so we didn't think of how to think about this question. We did 2 things. One is we asked people whether they'll pay for it, right? Whether our friends and so on, right? And then we think about how we're actually going to distribute enough of this for it to be a viable business. And then that was kind of from what you nowadays would call primary research, right? And then the secondary research is, okay, we kind of Google how many smartphones there are. What if everybody buys a copy, how big is the market, right? And then would this become a bigger problem or a smaller problem? And obviously, since more and more people use smartphones, it will only become a bigger problem, right? So very naively, we thought that was enough. But it turns out actually the biggest problem was neither one of this. People were willing to pay, and the market was becoming bigger. The biggest problem was distribution. So it turns out later in our lifetime, we realized that for the first 4 years, we actually didn't have any real scalable business because there was no such thing called App Store. Nobody was downloading apps. There's no real way to sell software on phones, basically, to consumers. So distribution was actually the real problem, but that was the problem that we did not understand how to do research on.
And how did you overcome this? I mean, tell us a little bit more about your early adoption journey.
So I think overall, tenCube over 5.5 years or so, went across 3 main phases. In the first phase, you can call it R&D / service company, right? So we had a product that we were developing, but it turns out that the only customers, and this is by the way a bad example, this is a counter example, it's a bad case, right? This shouldn't be the case, right? In the first phase, which lasted about 2 years, it turns out that only customers we could find who would pay real money for it are the really paranoid people. So because the general consumers, while they kind of not want to lose their phone, they were just not concerned enough to go to a website, figure out how to download a file, Bluetooth it over to the phone, install it, and then download a license key, pay for it, and then go through all that thing, right? So the consumers were just not ready to do that. So come on in, please. So the only guys we found who were ready to actually pay real money for it were the paranoid people such as the police force and the militaries, and those were the guys who were our early customers.
Okay.
So they obviously has an interest that's far beyond consumer in terms of this, both from as users as well as potential people who need to crack the software in case criminals start using it.
Okay.
So they were the ones who were interested in it, but obviously their requirement is going to be very different from general consumers' requirements. So they needed us to do a certain level of encryption, needed a certain level of robustness, scalability, and some of these things that is very different from what a consumer would require.
Okay.
And thus we actually end up spending, I would say, 50% of our time building stuff that we didn't end up needing in the first 2 years.
So it was a lot of bespoke and customized features for your first customers.
Exactly. Some were even quite tangential to what we actually do.
Okay, and what about your second phase?
So the second phase is finally at the point where we got to a point whereby we started to see. So this was a time where iPhone first started coming out and Android first started coming out. And BlackBerry was already quite big by then. When we first started, BlackBerry wasn't even big in Singapore yet.
Okay.
So by then, the second phase is whereby we had what I would call traditional distribution through telcos and OEMs.
Okay.
So in the third and fourth year of the company, most of our business, in fact, I say 90% of business came from distribution channels like telcos and OEMs. So, which was initially what we thought was going to be the main distribution. Obviously, when you build an app like that, you think, okay, maybe when people buy phone at that time, they sign up for another $2 a month, $1 a month. Maybe people sign up. Actually, it turns out people did.
Okay.
Right? People were interested. The problem initially why we went to guys like Singtel and Star and said that, would you like to provide this service? So therein lies so a bit tangential, but therein lies a lesson we learned.
Okay.
It was not that they were not interested. Even right from the beginning, they told us they were interested. But the problem is they make a lot more money selling a ringtone.
I see.
Because right in the beginning, we only could target 5% of the smartphones.
Yeah.
We could only target smartphones, which is 5% of the phone population.
Yeah.
So they were like, why do I put all this effort for this 5% of population?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any real money compared to selling a ringtone. So I sell a ringtone instead. Right? Not that this is not interesting.
Yeah.
So by the time in the third or fourth year of the company, we started to get these channels and started to pay attention because they started to realize that devices like BlackBerry make them a lot more money. Value-added services actually was important.
Yeah.
This is coupled with the fact that things like voice revenue was coming down and other revenue was coming down, so they had to add on other services. So because of that, we started to have distribution channel like that who work with us in terms of bringing distribution. So that was the second phase.
Okay. And the final phase is, I assume, the App Store?
Correct. So final phase was which is actually when our business really become a lot more scalable without us having to close a deal and go and babysit the telco every month. Is when App Store came. There was both iPhone App Store as well as the Android App Store. For us, a lot more on Android because our product was a lot weaker on iPhone.
Okay.
That's another story. But for us, Android was actually the main boost for us, and that's when we saw that our business was scaling on itself without us doing anything. It was just more Android devices get shipped, means more people buy our product.
Okay. Okay, thanks for telling us a lot about your business development journey. Tell us from the point that your company was growing, in terms of people, in terms of talent management and managing people, recruiting the right people firstly. And as your team grew, what were the most important decisions you had to make? And whether you had to stick to fundamentals, pivoting. So there are two questions here. One of which is about management of talent, and the other is about management of your core fundamentals.
Okay. So in terms of people, I think we were quite lucky in a sense. Most of the people we had, in fact, I said 90% of the people we had were either first or second degree friends. So they were mostly from NUS.
Okay.
And the three founders we met in school, and that's how we formed our team there. There's both pros and cons about that, I think.
Okay, tell us more.
Well, I think the pro is that you already have some sort of friendship, so the basis is a bit stronger, the bond is a bit stronger. or see it the negative way. If you have an argument, it's harder to break up because there are a lot of common friends, and you would think like, oh, then how to explain to other people, and so you know, your tie with each other is automatically stronger. So the con of that is that you tend to be less upfront with each other.
Okay.
Because you tend to be a bit more diplomatic, you cut a bit more slack. So sometimes that is harmful and dangerous.
Yeah.
So which is why one of the things I learned eventually to do is to really face issues quickly and upfront. So I think that would be one of the more important things. Even if it's small things, it can be as simple as hygiene.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, right?
Okay.
If you don't deal with things like that, they get festered. They get festered. So that's kind of our experience in it. So the good part, the lucky part we were is that our team kind of all stuck together quite strongly, even at several points, like including 3 times we were running out of money. One time we actually didn't have enough money to pay our guys for almost 3 months.
Okay.
So most of them actually voluntarily take no pay.
Okay.
Some of them needed a bit of pay, so we kind of made a bit of pay. So to stick together, because at the time we were actually had a serious consideration, do we want to continue?
Okay.
Right, we were very upfront and say, okay, we're running out of money. Right, so continue or not.
Okay.
So I think everybody put out their hands and said, we still can survive a bit more without pay, so let's keep this going. So that's kind of the good part, right? So the bad part is, again, the flip side of this is that when a breakup actually happens, which it did at some point, it also is quite damaging.
Okay, and how did you cope with breakup? Like, I'm sorry, but did any of your co-founders leave?
No, but one of my best friends actually ended up having to leave the company because of conflict.
And
with
how
one
did
of
you
our
manage, the destruction that is caused by a very close core team member leaving?
Yeah. Painfully, I'm not sure whether there's a good way around it.
Okay.
I
And how
think
did you manage everybody else in the team?
If you ask me, I think most of the work is not done at the point of change. Most of the work is done during your time together.
Yeah.
Before that.
Okay.
It's about how you treat each other, what the culture is like, and whether you can weather such a thing. I think by the time the change comes, the consequence is already predetermined. It's what the relationship you built before that. So, which is why I think it's a lot more about being honest and open with each other.
Okay.
Right now.
Okay, and how do you manage, this thing about pivoting? A lot of people say, if this doesn't work, let's pivot. So when do you decide when to pivot and when not to pivot?
Well, I'm sure there's a lot more literature in terms of the strategy around it.
Yeah.
But I guess your question sounds like it's more towards the emotional part about it, whereby some people think we want to pivot, some people don't, or some people think we want to pivot but they don't show up or continuing. So, I mean, there are a lot of those things happening. I'm not sure I have a good answer for that.
Okay. Did you at any point include some features? I'm sure because you have to do a lot of customized and bespoke solutions in your first phase. A lot of it was creating things which you don't feel is core to your fundamental product. How far would you go to customize it for a customer?
That's an interesting question. So, to some degree, actually, our naiveness actually helped us.
Okay.
We didn't know that we were getting distracted, so we were not demoralized by it.
Okay.
If we knew, I don't know whether everybody would be as motivated in terms of just finish this phase and go and try the next thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of an ironic thing, whereby not knowing something might actually help you. But knowing it, how far would we go? I would say that we probably would have come back a lot earlier.
Okay.
So that was but we started off way early for the market. So ironically, it is because of naiveness and our distraction that actually lasted us that long.
Okay. Now we're going to the more interesting part called money. Okay. I see all the startups always telling me, fundraising is perhaps the most challenging part in a startup's life. Our government does give grants, not necessarily to everybody. So tell us about your fundraising journey. Did you get a grant to begin with?
Not to begin with. We later on did get grants, and of course other incentives like tax and standard stuff.
Okay. How did you approach investors? At certain points you ran out of money, and how did you firstly continue your startup journey? And secondly, how did you approach investors?
Okay, so several questions there. One is, so let me give you the facts first, right? So, by the way, are people bored? Are these topics what is interesting?
No.
Yeah, we're good. Carry on. Okay. So our fundraising, we did 2 rounds of fundraising. Well, okay. First, we put in our own money. There was the 3 of us put in 10K each. There was 30K. Again, very naively calculate how much money we need to survive for 6 months. And that's kind of the number we came up with. Obviously, we didn't get anywhere within 6 months, so we had to. That's the first starting point of why we took a project.
Okay.
Because we ran out of money. So that's not a good thing, right? In a good scenario, we shouldn't be forced to take a project. We should take a project because it's aligned, but not because we ran out of money.
Okay.
But back to the question of fundraising, we did 2 rounds of fundraising. First round was with 2 angel investors, as well as the US. That was matched by Seeds,
Okay.
the Seeds Capital.
Okay.
It's a 1-to-1 matching scheme at that time. So that was 600K. The second round of funding, we actually looked all around Singapore. That was, I don't remember the year, that was when the first Asian financial crisis hit. So we actually almost closed the round of funding, and then that vaporized, and then we had to go outside of Singapore to look for funding. We ended up taking on an Indian investor, Indian corporate investor.
Okay. And
So that was
how
for
long did it
1.2.
take for you to secure that funding?
The first round was quite fast. That was actually after we've gotten police force sign on as a prospective customer. So that actually was good enough for the investors to come in. So that was maybe 3 months to get to an OK, and actually 6 months to actually draw down.
Okay. And
So-
sorry. Okay, there is this thing about investors versus entrepreneurs, right? A lot of people say, you have to, investors choose their entrepreneurs a lot. And on the flip side, as an entrepreneur, we also know that we have to choose our investors very well. What are the key attributes of an investor you would look out for?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that it depends on context, right? So I'll say back then when we were raising our first round of capital, again we were naive. Even if we were not naive, we would have known that there really wasn't much choice. So basically wherever we could find money, we would have taken it. But today, Singapore has a lot more capital, a lot more kind of investors. So I would be a bit more selective.
Okay.
It would include, I think the first I'll go for is the character of the investor.
Okay.
Right, whether they were honest, upfront, easy to work with. I think that's actually more important than people. It's underrated.
Yeah.
That's actually very important.
Yeah.
The second would be understanding their decision structure. Whether they have GP and LP structure, who are the GPs, how the decisions get made, how fast they get made. Because sometimes those things is where you get stuck the most. And I think the last part is just like interviewing, just like you would interview a potential employee, and just like the investors would interview you, I would also interview the investors, kind of as an exercise to see what kind of people they are. Whether, like for example, I would ask them the questions. Okay, what's your fund size? What's your fund life? And what do you have plans for follow-up round? And questions like this. It might not actually be relevant to you, but by going through those questions, you understand the investors, whether they have a plan, whether they know what they're doing, and whether they were honest and they were upfront about sharing their plans with you too.
Okay.
So I think that would be an exercise that we go through.